Today on Rappler, the U.S. East Coast struggles to restore power and mass transit after Superstorm Sandy. Economic planning officials say the Philippines will still grow by 5 to 6% in the second half of 2012. And former Obama rival Senator McCain sees stronger ties between the Philippines and the U.S. under a Romney presidency. Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Rappler, your social news network. U.S. cities battered by Superstorm Sandy begin the huge task of rebuilding and recovery, restoring power and mass transit, and cleaning up debris and burnt buildings. Widespread blackouts affect more than 8 million people, crippling cities from the Carolinas to Maine Tuesday. As cities on the East Coast grapple with floods, western states like West Virginia deal with blizzards like this that dump 3 feet of snow. The U.S. death toll rises to at least 44 by late Tuesday. 1 is killed in Canada. This brings the death toll to more than 100, including the people killed in the Caribbean last week. The storm leaves New York in a state of devastation. Cars float in submerged parking lots, and parts of the city remain without power.
Sandy hit us very hard. It was a storm of historic intensity. But New Yorkers are resilient, and we have seen an enormous outpouring of support from people eager to volunteer, donate, and help out. Restoring power and mass transit remain the 2 biggest challenges in the days ahead. Our administration continues to work closely with Con Ed to ensure that all New Yorkers get power back as soon as humanly possible.
Transportation officials say 7 subway tunnels under New York's East River remain flooded. Pumping out water and conducting repairs may take days or even weeks. JFK and Newark airports reopen with limited services, while LaGuardia Airport remains closed because of significant damage. After being shut for 2 days, Wall Street goes back to business Wednesday. The storm also forces 3 nuclear reactors to close and a 4th placed on alert after storm waters threaten cooling systems. In Queens, a massive fire destroys more than 80 homes as 200 firefighters fight the 6-alarm blaze. One resident describes the scene as a war zone. In Long Island, a resident captures on camera a tree being uprooted from his backyard. In New Jersey, the National Guard arrives Tuesday evening to help evacuate residents from flooded areas. Its mass transit system is suspended, with 11 commuter rail lines suffering major damage. The storm also destroys homes and sections of Seaside Heights' iconic boardwalks. Video network Now This News posts a photo from a New Jersey resident showing photos before and after Superstorm Sandy. Government estimates put the storm's damage between $10 to $20 billion. With miles and miles of floodwater, clean drinking water is in short supply. New York State officials tell people to boil their water. In Maryland, state workers rush to stop sewage overflow into the Little Patuxent River. Joining us now for some perspective from the East Coast of the United States in Baltimore, Maryland, is former reporter and a good friend and former colleague, Aladin Bacolod. Aladin, tell us what happened.
The brunt of the storm, Maria, really was felt Tuesday night. That was about 24 hours ago or so, where strong winds, unprecedented rain, nonstop for about 24 hours just hit the East Coast. And we're talking about storm surge as well, where high tide was on. The water from Maryland to New York rising as high as 14 feet, in some areas as high as 19 feet. So imagine that 12 inches of water, really strong winds, about 90 to, in some areas, 115 miles per hour, affecting 13 states. And that's about 4 or 5 times the size of the Philippines, the magnitude of the area. So because of that, obviously a lot of people, millions lost power. There were a lot of flooding in several areas, and of course damages. A lot of trees fell down, which is being attributed to the number of deaths now. And up to now, power is still not being restored in a lot of areas.
The pictures are really shocking. I mean, there's a part near my old hometown that's completely covered in sand. Aladin, how can you compare this to what we go through in the Philippines?
It's difficult for me to compare it because the kind of storm we have there are sometimes short, not as long as the one we experience here. Also, the kind of infrastructure we have there is so much different from the kind of infrastructure we have here. We have here, solid infrastructures, houses that are built differently than theirs. But we're talking about rain here that's nonstop. It reminds me of the recent habagat that you had experienced,
Yes.
where flooding was just nonstop. But the drainage system here is better. So it's really difficult to compare it. I would, however, describe it as somewhat a shocker for people here who's not used to this kind of intensity of a storm. We have storm here which can only last for hours. Typically a 6-hour storm warning or an 8-hour flood warning. We're talking here about 24 to 48 hours flood warning and storm warning. And the nature of the storm as well is really different because we're talking about the cold, the cold weather coming in as well. So those kinds of factors played into why this has been considered a superstorm.
Today, U.S. President Barack Obama is going to New Jersey, to this areas hardest hit, and talk to them. What's next?
Next is really looking into how the government will react to the rehabilitation effort. This is very crucial, I think, personally, to the way how the election will play out. As you know, most calamities in the U.S. is really handled by the state, but a lot of people knowing how the state funding, we are close to the end of the year where funds are already low. And so we're really looking at how the federal government will be able to help. We're looking at also how the market will react to this. The stock market is expected to open today where it has been closed for the past 2 days. And those come into play because we're talking about 30 billion in lost economic opportunity for the U.S. and East Coast is a big player in the whole U.S. economy. So that is really the key here, how the rehabilitation and the recovery efforts is going to be to happen. Because 6 days into the election, we want people to be able to vote at least at that on election day. But the fact that a lot of people are affected by this, we don't know if how things is going to play out.
Fantastic. Ladin Bacolod, and thank you so much for giving us perspective on this.
My pleasure.